Welcome to the Chosson and Kallah Shmooze you wish you had, but never got, part 20. I remind everybody, once again, to please do yourself a favor and listen to this series from beginning to end. You could find the beginning by Googling my YouTube channel and then look under the playlist. There's different playlists. The playlist that is Chosson and Kallah Shmooze, go to the beginning, which is Chosson and Kallah Shmooze you wish you had but never got intro, and then it'll automatically lead you from one video to the next. It's important because we're talking about serious, sensitive topics, matters that truly, according to our sages, should only be discussed on a one-to-one basis, and we're using this medium of video to do that as well because I'm only talking to you. But it is a very serious matter, and you cannot fully appreciate the context of many of these discussions without following them in order. Today, I hope, Bezras Hashem, we will conclude our discussion on the notion and the tension between sexual abstention and sexual pleasure that seems to exist in most of our teachings, halacha and hashkafa, and then probably the next discussion will start going into more areas of sexual dysfunction and sexual pathology and various ways to work with them. But today we're going to conclude our discussion by looking at some more sources that give us a very positive perspective on the sexual pleasure and the importance of joy and connection during the sexual act. Some of you may be familiar with one of the most famous references in Shas, and that is on Gemara Shabbos on Daf Kuf Mem Amud Beis 140b. We have the daughters of Rav Chia. The daughters of Rav Chia got counsel from Rav Chia on how to be basically good wives, but more specifically, how to be good in bed. And Rashi's understanding over there, which you could look up, is essentially to be seductive, to reveal parts of their body slowly and reach a point of arousal. Now, this is significant for a number of reasons. First of all, it's significant because Rashi seems to be using a visual language, and that's important because there are many discussions in the Gemara that indicate and frown upon gazing and looking at parts of the body. So however you want to resolve that contradiction in your mind, we did discuss in earlier sections of this series, we did discuss the notion of contradiction and what purpose contradiction may serve in Torah Shabbal Peh, in the oral Torah. But what you can see plainly here in Rashi is that the visual aspect is a part of seduction, and he's teaching his daughters, essentially, to be seductive. Rav Chia is teaching his daughters, and, interestingly enough, Rashi's daughters were famous in their own right. It's also interesting to know that the Gemara in Yevamos, I think on Daf Samach Beis and Beis, I think 62 or 65, relates many challenges that Reb Chia had with his wife, and they didn't necessarily have the easiest marriage. So the significance of this is unknown, but we are dealing with the same characters. Perhaps he was very careful to want to make sure that his daughters had more shalom bayis. Unknown, all conjecture, but the words stand for themselves. The issue over here is also that comes out from Rashi is something else, which is we have seen so far in at least all the halachic and hashkafic discussions no mention of male sexual pleasure. The halacha and the hashkafa really has continuously stressed making sure that the woman, making sure that one's wife is pleased sexually, and that is important enough, quite clearly, very important, but it never mentions anything about the man. We also did discuss earlier in a number of these discussions, we did mention that there is a possibility that a man is really subsumed and included within the general idea. It's just that less emphasis was necessary. But here is explicitly from a Rishon, one of the greatest Rishonim of all time, is a clear expression of the value of the man experiencing more pleasure and experiencing, quite frankly, a sexy experience. That's exactly what Rashi is describing for Reb Chia as describing for his daughters, that's what he wanted them to do for their husbands. Okay, so that's important. We also have Rav Yaakov Emden in his Siddur, in his discussion of conduct for Friday night. It's Mate Mitas Hakesef Perek Vav Os Yud, and he is very clear that when in the sex act, in the act of sexual intercourse, when there is desire and there is a special passion and heat, that affects the formation and in particular the intellect of the child. So from a traditional point of view, there's some kind of mystical power in the union of the heart and soul of the husband and wife that injects a certain kind of power into the soul and the formation of the child. And as I remarked in the past, if people have homeopathic remedies and other things that are based on other traditions and not necessarily what we call hard empirical science, we certainly are entitled to ours. I would add, though, that in my personal opinion, oftentimes, just like you can have numbers in different languages and different notations, but conceptually you're representing the same idea with a different symbolic structure, oftentimes it seems to me, and this is just my personal thought, it seems to me that many of the mystical traditions are capturing a psychological truth that is conducted in the emotional, psychological, and, if you will, the soul connection between two people. So if a husband and wife are in a situation where there's a lot of passion and love, well, that certainly could have a positive effect on the developmental context of the fetus and of the child as the child grows up. But we know that the hormones, the soup in which the child is developing and the nerves and neurons are forming and the limbs are forming are inside the mother. So a depressed, unhappy mother, a tense mother, it's certainly understandable that could affect the formation of the child. Again, clearly Rav Yaakov Emden comes in favor of a love and passion. He mentions those words. He mentions the heat of passion will affect positively the formation of the intellect of the child. And, that's quite along the lines of what we were fleshing out the day before and the day before that, about that there is somehow a difference between selfish lust and passionate love. And you see here that at least for Rav Yaakov Emden and Rashi, that seems to be so. Now, Sefer HaChasidim in Siman Shin Samach Beis, so that's 362, in Sefer HaChasidim, he tells over an interesting story. There was a very pious individual who would not kiss his children except when he was in a state of arousal of love, and his heart was gladdened with love of Hashem. And then when he would kiss them on the mouth, and somehow or another he believed that he would transfer some special spirit, some special wisdom from him into his children. Okay, that's the story brought down in Sefer Hasidim. And what happens then is his students asked him, so that would make sense then when you're engaged in the act of lovemaking with your wife, you should have in mind Yireh Shamayim, so your children will become tzaddikim, so your children become righteous. And he said, actually, no. What I have in mind is having a great deal of passion. And he said that when there's a lot of passion, between the husband and wife. That will make children or tzaddikim. And he goes further to say that if you think about Torah during a sexual act, it will ruin your passion. So here we have a very striking point that not only is it important to have passion, but that if you try to be too big of a tzaddik and you try to think about Torah during the sexual act, you ruin the passion and thereby, in some way, do not give the full benefit, the full supercharging that could come to the formation of the child. This is in Sefer Hasidim. You could see it for yourself. Now, there's also a very interesting statement in the Gemara in Nida on 17a, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, and it talks about this family that was apparently a family involved in politics, in a good sense, involved in trying to make sure that a lot of communal needs were taken care of. And this family, called the family of Munbaz, they apparently traveled a lot, were up very late, and the Gemara over there says that even though ordinarily it is discouraged to be sexual during the daytime for modesty reasons, this family, it was actually praiseworthy that they were sexual during the daytime because they'd be more rested and more able to function. Now, that Gemara on its own is remarkable in a sense that you see that even though other statements come out very strong against being sexual during the daytime, here you see a very different approach. Again, contradiction contains within it the seeds of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the seeds of the oral Torah that can't fully be expressed. In other words, the rules are based on circumstances, and circumstances for different people change. That would be remarkable enough. However, Rashi says something that's really worth repeating word for word. I will try to translate it properly. Rashi says the problem here is they'll be sleepy. And he says, because they're sleepy, he said they're not going to want to be sexual so much. And because they're not going to want to be sexual so much, they're only, and this is important, they're only going to be sexual to fulfill the mitzvah or to make their wives happy. And Rashi is saying that is a problem. He says because in his heart he will not really desire her, and because he won't desire her, in some way he will feel disgusted, and then the children that will come out will be from the kind of the 9 children that come from improper intentions during sexuality that's listed in the Nidarim on 20b. So now, mind-blowingly, we have come full circle, because the Gemara Nidarim on 20b, which we saw earlier, tells us that, in fact, there are many dangers, spiritual dangers, for not having the right intentions during sexuality. And it would seem that Shulchan Aruch, as we saw in Reish Mem and in Orach Chaim and in Even Ezer Siman Chaf Aleph, we see Rav Yosef Karo certainly comes at least on the side of Ima Shalom, that one should be very careful, one should limit their desire, one should engage in sexuality only in the middle of the night because you'll have a stray thought. We saw the Ramah in Even Ezer, right? We saw the Ramah said, well, technically anything's permitted, but he still encourages abstention. And here, ironically, Rashi is clear, and he takes his cue from the Gemara. Rashi is clear that being sexual only for the mitzvah or only to please one's wife, in fact, could make a problem because the connection won't be proper and it would lead to improper intentions, which would end up causing the children to be spiritually damaged. So ironically, the same behavior of abstention and limiting pleasure that is considered a concern that could cause improper children, it gets flipped on its head, and doing things only for the sake of the mitzvah also could produce that problem. Once again, complete paradox and contradiction, because the answer ultimately is each person needs to understand where they are in this process and where their spouse is in this process. And so the underpinning is that this is a nuanced topic, that there's probably not one hard and fast rule, but the key element, the ultimate spirit of the law, is that there should be a focus, a passion, a love, a pleasure, a bond between husband and wife. Now, there may be different roads to achieve that. For one, it might be the road of abstention and limiting pleasure. For another, it may be the road of expanding pleasure, teasing, seduction, as we saw in the Rashi. But the point of it all is a true love and connection and bond.